Imagine sitting in your own living room, sipping a cup of coffee, when suddenly you hear the sound of your front door unlocking, yet you never gave anyone permission to enter. Your heart skips a beat. For a split second, you wonder if it's a burglar, or maybe you're just imagining things. But no, someone is inside your home. That's how my nightmare with the HOA's self-appointed queen, otherwise known as Karen, began. Now, let me rewind a little so you fully understand the tension leading up to that moment. I'd only lived in this neighborhood for a few months. The houses were nice, the lawns were neat, and on the surface, it seemed like the perfect community. But behind the trimmed hedges lurked an HOA that felt more like a dictatorship run by one woman who seemed to think the rules didn't apply to her, but did apply to everyone else. That woman was Karen. From day one, she made it her mission to welcome me. But her welcome came with constant complaints. My trash can was supposedly visible from the street. My grass was a little too long. She even said my car didn't match the aesthetic of the neighborhood. And the worst part? She delivered all these warnings in person, showing up at my doorstep uninvited, clipboard in hand, acting as though she were sheriff of the block. At first, I ignored her. I thought maybe she was just nosy and would eventually move on to some other target, but ignoring her seemed to fuel her obsession. She started lurking around my property, pretending to check for compliance. I caught her peeking over my backyard fence more than once. That's when I realized this wasn't just a pushy HOA president. This was someone who had no respect for boundaries. And then came the day everything escalated. It was a quiet Saturday morning. I had plans to relax, maybe do some laundry, and enjoy a lazy weekend. But just as I sat down with my coffee, I heard it. The faint metallic sound of my front door lock turning. At first, I thought maybe I had left the door open. But when the knob twisted and the door creaked open, I froze. Standing there, bold as ever, was Karen. She stepped inside like she owned the place, her face smug, her eyes darting around my living room as though she were conducting an inspection. But what she didn't know was that she wasn't walking into just my home. There were 2 police officers already inside, invited guests, who had been waiting for her. Her face dropped. The second Karen stepped across the threshold, it was like time froze. Her usual smirk, so smug, so entitled, melted away the moment her eyes landed on the 2 uniformed officers sitting at my kitchen table. One of them leaned back in his chair, calm but observant, while the other adjusted his notepad, clearly prepared for this encounter. "Excuse me, ma'am," the taller officer said, rising to his feet. His tone was firm but not hostile. "Do you live here?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't have an immediate answer ready. Finally, she stammered, I'm the HOA president. This property falls under my jurisdiction." The officer raised an eyebrow. Jurisdiction? That's an interesting choice of word. I stayed quiet, letting the moment play out. I had already explained everything to the officers earlier that morning. After months of dealing with Karen's intrusions, I'd had enough. When I noticed her loitering near my front yard again, I decided to be proactive. I called the non-emergency line and requested assistance, explaining the situation in detail. They agreed to come by. And as luck or fate would have it, they were sitting in my home when Karen chose to cross the line in the most literal sense. Karen tried to recover her composure, straightening her posture and forcing a polite smile. "I'm here to ensure compliance with HOA regulations. This resident has repeatedly violated community standards. As president, I have the authority to inspect the property." The shorter officer closed his notepad with a snap. "Let's get something straight. You don't have the authority to enter someone's private home without permission. That's called trespassing." I watched her face turn red, blotchy patches spreading across her cheeks. She tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come now. Let's not be dramatic. I was just checking in. After all, this house belongs to the community. That's when I finally spoke. My voice was steady, though my hands were clenched under the table. No, Karen. This house belongs to me, not the HOA, not the community. You're standing in my living room, uninvited. Silence. You could feel the weight of it pressing down on the room. The taller officer stepped closer, his voice low but commanding. Ma'am, unless you can show us a legal document granting you entry to this residence, you're in serious violation of the law. Do you have such a document? Karen fumbled with the papers on her clipboard, flipping through them as though something, anything, would justify her actions. But there was nothing. Her power was an illusion, and now it was being stripped away piece by piece. And that's when things really started to unravel. Karen's hands trembled as she shuffled her papers, muttering excuses under her breath. The officer stood patiently, giving her just enough rope to tangle herself further. Finally, she slapped the clipboard shut with a sharp crack, her voice rising. This resident has been hostile from the start. I have dozens of complaints logged. The trash cans, the car, even the lawn. If we let people like him ignore the rules, the entire neighborhood will collapse into chaos. Her voice echoed against the walls, shrill and desperate. But instead of commanding respect, it only highlighted her loss of control. The shorter officer crossed his arms. Complaints about trash cans don't justify breaking and entering. Karen's lips tightened. She tried another tactic, lowering her tone into something almost sweet. Officers, you don't understand. I've dedicated years to protecting this neighborhood. Sometimes tough measures are required. If you won't follow the rules, someone has to enforce them. I couldn't help but laugh. It slipped out before I could stop myself, a short, bitter chuckle. Karen spun toward me, eyes blazing. You think this is funny? You've been undermining me since the day you moved in. I looked her square in the eye. What's funny is that you really believe you have the power to walk into my home. This isn't a playground, Karen. It's the law. The taller officer nodded. Exactly. And right now, the only person undermining themselves is you. Her composure cracked like glass. She pointed a trembling finger at me. He called you here. This is a setup. You're conspiring against me. The officers exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. The shorter one sighed. Ma'am, you need to calm down. We're not conspiring against you. We're responding to a very clear violation. Karen's breathing grew ragged, her chest rising and falling as though she'd run a mile. She paced in circles, muttering about bylaws and neighborhood harmony, but each word sounded weaker than the last. Then the taller officer spoke again, his voice like steel. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to step outside with us. We'll take your statement, but make no mistake. This is trespassing, and if you try this again, you could be facing criminal charges. Karen froze mid-step. For a moment, I thought she might argue again, but then her shoulders sagged, and the fire in her eyes dimmed. She looked smaller, somehow, deflated, as though reality had finally pierced her armor of arrogance. And yet, as the officers guided her toward the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't finished. People like her rarely back down for good. The real storm, I suspected, was still coming. The front door shut behind Karen with a heavy thud, the officers escorting her down the walkway. Through the window, I saw her arguing still, her hands flailing as she tried to salvage her authority. But the officers remained firm, their calm demeanor making her tantrum look all the more absurd. When they finally reached the curb, one officer gestured for her to sit on the bench by the community mailbox. She sat reluctantly, clutching her clipboard like a life raft. The taller officer returned inside to speak with me. Here's the deal, he said. We're filing an official report. If she comes back without your permission, call us immediately. We'll escalate it to trespassing charges. I nodded, relief washing over me. Thank you. I was starting to think no one would take this seriously. The officer offered a small smile. "Oh, we take it seriously. HOA rules might feel strict, but they never override property rights. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." After the officers left, the silence in my home felt almost surreal. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of Karen's constant presence. But I knew this wasn't the end. In fact, my phone buzzed not an hour later with an email from the HOA board. Subject line: urgent compliance meeting scheduled. Of course, when I showed up to the meeting a few days later, Karen was there, looking rattled but still clutching her beloved clipboard. She tried to paint me as the villain, accusing me of disrespecting her leadership, threatening the integrity of the neighborhood, and even weaponizing law enforcement. But this time, the board wasn't buying it. Word of her uninvited entry had spread quickly. Some neighbors had already voiced their own frustrations with her tactics. By the time she finished her speech, the room was ice-cold with disapproval. One board member cleared his throat. "Karen, you've overstepped. We cannot allow personal vendettas to dictate HOA policy. What you did was unacceptable." Her face drained of color. She sputtered, tried to defend herself, but the decision was unanimous. Karen was officially removed as president of the HOA. I sat there in quiet astonishment. For months, she had terrorized me with threats and nitpicking. But now the mask had slipped completely. The so-called queen of the neighborhood had fallen. Walking back home, I felt lighter, freer. My house was no longer under constant watch. My peace was restored. Not because Karen had suddenly changed, but because her reign of fear had finally ended. And while I knew she might still glare from across the street, one truth was clear. The moment she unlocked my door and found the police inside, Karen's power over me was gone forever. If you enjoyed this crazy HOA Karen story, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and of course, subscribe so you don't miss the next wild story coming your way. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's next.